The sun had barely risen over the rugged coastline when the sprawling Navy SEAL training facility began to stir. The air was thick with the scent of salt and metal, the distant roar of waves crashing against the cliffs below, mixing with the rhythmic clang of weights and the shouted commands of drill instructors. Inside the gym, the men moved like a single machine, every step, every motion meticulously synchronized. Muscles flexed, sweat gleamed, and hearts pounded in time with the drills. It was another grueling morning of the kind that separated the ordinary from the exceptional. Then, without warning, the rhythm broke. The door at the far end of the gym swung open, and she walked in. At first, nobody reacted. She wore no uniform, carried no bag, no identification, no paperwork. Not even a hint of where she had come from. Just a woman, alone, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted her own strength. But then, slowly, every head turned. Every soldier, even the most hardened, experienced SEALs, stopped in mid-motion. The room seemed to pause, as if the air itself had been commanded to hold its breath. She walked with a grace that was impossible to ignore. Her eyes swept the room, sharp and analytical, taking in every detail: the placement of weapons, the stance of each soldier, the tension in their muscles, even the flicker of doubt in the eyes of the rookies. It was unsettling. Some of the men exchanged glances. Who is she? How did she get here? The commanding officer, a veteran with decades of field experience and a reputation for never being surprised, narrowed his eyes. Who are you? He barked, stepping forward, his voice echoing off the metal walls. She didn't answer. She only looked at him directly, with an intensity that made even him take a half step back. There was no fear in her gaze, no arrogance, just a quiet, commanding presence that seemed to settle over the entire room. The soldiers whispered among themselves. No ID, no record, no past, and yet some instinctive part of them recognized something they couldn't name. Something familiar, almost primal, and that recognition made their hearts race. The commanding officer motioned toward the training mat. If you're here to train, then prove it, he said. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and stepped forward. What happened next stunned everyone. During the first obstacle course, she moved with precision and speed that seemed impossible. Every jump, climb, and maneuver was executed flawlessly. When the soldiers reached the climbing wall, struggling against fatigue, she scaled it as though it were a mere set of steps. When they struggled through the water obstacle, she cut through the currents like a shadow, never slowing, never missing a beat. Whispers of awe and disbelief filled the gym. How is she doing that? One rookie muttered. Even the veteran SEALs couldn't deny it. She was extraordinary. But the more impressive part wasn't her speed or strength, it was her awareness. Her eyes scanned constantly, reading the movements of others with uncanny accuracy, anticipating their errors, subtly adjusting her own movements in response. It wasn't just physical skill. It was tactical genius, honed to a level few could imagine. The day passed in a blur of astonishment. She didn't speak, didn't explain herself, didn't ask for recognition. She simply moved, accomplished, and observed. By the end of the morning, every man in that facility knew one undeniable truth. Whoever this woman was, she was no ordinary person. She was something else entirely. And in the back of their minds, every SEAL, no matter how experienced, began to wonder the same chilling question. Who is she, and why does she command this room without even trying? As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the facility, she stood silently, watching them. And for the first time that day, the men realized something unsettling. The balance of power had shifted, and they didn't yet know why or what she was capable of. The whispers continued long after she had left the mat. No one dared speak too loudly. Something about her demanded respect, attention, even fear. One man muttered under his breath, "I don't care who she is. I'd follow her anywhere." And in that moment, something unspoken passed between every soldier in the room. This was only the beginning, the morning after her arrival. The SEALs returned to the gym with a renewed wariness. They had spent the night whispering in small groups, trying to make sense of her presence. Some wondered if she was part of some classified program, an operative whose existence had been scrubbed from every record. Others were more pragmatic. Does it matter? She's here now, and she's faster, stronger, smarter than any of us. The commanding officer, though still skeptical, decided the best way to gauge her abilities was the most straightforward, the standard SEAL testing protocol. Obstacle courses, endurance drills, tactical exercises, every challenge designed to push even the most elite warriors to their absolute limit. The woman accepted without hesitation. She didn't argue, didn't question, didn't even glance at the paperwork she didn't have. She simply stepped into the first obstacle course as though she had run it hundreds of times before. From the start, she was impossible to ignore. Her movements were precise, almost mathematical. She leapt over walls with flawless form, swung across ropes with a fluidity that made the seasoned SEALs stop mid-stride to watch, and dove into water obstacles with the grace of a trained diver. Each task she performed flawlessly, yet she made it look effortless. The men around her pushed themselves harder, unwilling to be outdone by someone without a rank, without a record, without a name. But even as they strained and gasped for breath, she was always a step ahead. When the first trainee fell while navigating the monkey bars, she was there instantly, offering silent guidance and, without touching him, subtly correcting his form so he could complete the course. During the time drills, the astonishment only grew. The SEALs had trained for years, and yet she completed the course in less than half the expected time, flawlessly executing every maneuver. Even the veteran instructors exchanged uneasy glances, some of them whispering to each other. She's not just good, she's better than all of us. And yet, despite her superiority, she didn't flaunt it. She didn't look around for recognition, didn't smirk, didn't boast. She simply moved, quietly commanding attention through action alone. Her silence was deafening. Then came the tactical exercises. The SEALs had been tested in countless simulations, but she introduced a level of instinctive strategy that no one had ever seen before. She analyzed situations in real time, anticipating the movements of her teammates, predicting the flow of the mission, and making split-second decisions that were always correct. One young SEAL, barely 6 months into training, nearly stumbled over a barricade during a combat simulation. Before anyone could react, she was beside him, silently pointing out the path, correcting his posture, and then disappearing into the next challenge as if she had never been there. By midday, a palpable tension had settled over the room. Some SEALs were intimidated, some frustrated, some inspired. They all, however, recognized a truth they could not ignore: this woman, who had no records, no identification, and no past that anyone could verify, was operating on a level far beyond even their own. And yet, despite her unmatched skills, the mystery only deepened. Where had she learned these techniques? How could someone with no history execute maneuvers with such flawless precision? The questions hovered in the air, unanswered, as the training continued. At the end of the day, the commanding officer called the team together. He looked at her, and then at his men, his expression unreadable. "You've all seen what she can do. I don't know where she came from, and frankly, I don't know if anyone ever will. But one thing is clear: she is not to be underestimated." Every SEAL in that room felt it, the undeniable truth that their training, their experience, and even their confidence had been quietly shaken. And as they filed out of the gym, whispering and watching her move with effortless precision, one thought dominated their minds: this is only the beginning. Whatever she's capable of, it's far beyond anything we've seen before. The day ended with more questions than answers and a growing sense of unease. They had not yet discovered her past. They didn't know her motives, and they couldn't predict what she would do next. All they knew for certain was that she was no ordinary recruit, and every instinct they had told them that their lives, and perhaps the course of their missions, were about to change forever. By the third day of her arrival, it had become clear to everyone at the SEAL facility that this woman was not here to simply follow orders. She was here to rewrite the rules entirely. The morning began like any other: soldiers running through drills, instructors barking commands, the sound of batas hitting the ground in precise rhythm. But the moment she entered the training field, everything shifted. Where the SEALs expected routine, she introduced improvisation. Obstacles were approached in ways no one had been taught. Exercises were modified mid-run. Tactics that had been drilled into the men for months and even years were suddenly being challenged. Some of the senior SEALs bristled. One grizzled veteran muttered, "She doesn't even know the protocols. How can she think she can lead this?" But the more he watched, the more he realized that she already knew better than anyone else. Every adjustment she made improved efficiency, minimized risk, and revealed hidden weaknesses that the men had never noticed in themselves. The commanding officer, frustrated and confused, finally confronted her. "Listen, you have no clearance here. No record. You're breaking protocol. Stop it immediately." She didn't flinch. Her eyes met his, unwavering, and without a single word, she executed a maneuver during a live exercise that prevented a trainee from being seriously injured. The commanding officer froze, watching as she moved with split-second precision, redirecting the trainee out of danger. Her awareness of her surroundings and of every person's movements in the field was uncanny, almost preternatural. The SEALs were stunned. They had trained for years, some of them decades, and yet here was someone with no past, no ID, no record, demonstrating skills they had only dreamed of mastering. Some of the younger trainees stared wide-eyed, silently questioning everything they had ever learned. Some veterans exchanged uneasy glances, a quiet recognition passing between them. This woman is something else entirely. By midday, she had begun pushing the men beyond their limits. Where traditional training focused on repetition and discipline, she demanded innovation and adaptability. She challenged each soldier to make decisions in seconds they hadn't been trained to think in. Every choice was a test, every failure a lesson. And through it all, she remained silent, never raising her voice, never seeking acknowledgement. Rumors began circulating among the soldiers. Some whispered that she might be a member of a secret, top-level government program, a ghost operative whose missions were so classified they didn't exist on paper. Others speculated she had military experience from another country, someone so elite that even the SEALs could not measure up. But no one knew for sure. Even asking her questions yielded nothing. She simply observed, acted, and taught by example. That evening, during a tactical simulation in the dense forest surrounding the facility, she again proved her unmatched skill. The SEALs were tasked with securing a high-value target while avoiding simulated enemy fire. The men relied on their training, coordinating silently as teams. But she anticipated the movements of every soldier, correcting positioning and guiding them toward unseen advantages. Where the men had expected chaos, her presence brought a strange, silent order. After the exercise, the commanding officer called the group together. The men were exhausted, drenched in sweat, hearts still pounding from the intensity. "She's extraordinary," muttered one veteran quietly, but no one knew the half of it. While the SEALs admired her ability to lead without a title, they also felt something deeper, an almost primal respect, mixed with unease. She had shattered their rules, exposed their weaknesses, and forced them to confront the reality that their experience might not be enough to measure her abilities. As the sun set, painting the sky in deep orange and crimson, she stood silently apart, watching the men catch their breath. Some stared at her, hoping for an answer, for a hint of her identity, but she gave none. She simply looked out toward the horizon, calm, composed, and untouchable. By the end of the day, one thing was clear: she was not just a recruit. She was a force breaking every rule, challenging every assumption, and proving with every action that experience, rank, and record meant nothing in her presence. And deep down, each SEAL felt a growing, uncomfortable truth. They were witnessing something far beyond ordinary. Military skill, a glimpse of a warrior whose past and abilities were entirely unknown. And with that, the facility understood. The training with her would never be the same. Again, the facility had just settled into a quiet routine after another. Grueling day of training when the intelligence officer walked briskly into the operations room. His face, usually calm and composed, was pale, eyes darting across the room as if searching for someone to confirm the news. "There's been a breach," he said, his voice tight. "Foreign operatives have infiltrated a restricted zone nearby. They've evaded local surveillance and are suspected of planning an attack on a strategic target." The SEALs froze. Breaches like these were rare, almost unheard of, and the implications were severe. The commanding officer's brow furrowed as he scanned the room, calculating next steps. And then, instinctively, all eyes shifted to her. She had been silent all morning, observing, stretching, and moving with her usual calm. But now she stepped forward, her posture straight, eyes narrowing slightly as if the report had confirmed something she already knew. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. Instead, she began moving through the room, pointing at maps, diagrams, and surveillance feeds with pinpoint precision. Within seconds, she identified vulnerabilities in the perimeter that even the seasoned SEALs had overlooked. She highlighted blind spots in security cameras, predicted the likely ingress points, and suggested defensive maneuvers that had never been taught in any standard protocol. Every recommendation she made was backed by flawless reasoning, supported by intuition so precise it bordered on the supernatural. One of the veterans whispered, almost in awe, How does she know this?" She didn't answer. She never did. That night, a covert operation was authorized to intercept the operatives. The SEALs were tense, adrenaline coursing through their veins, aware that any misstep could cost lives. She volunteered to lead a reconnaissance team. The commanding officer hesitated, but something in her eyes, a calm, unshakable certainty, made him step back. The moon hung low over the coastline as they approached the infiltration site. Shadows danced across the forest floor, leaves rustling underfoot. The team moved silently, following her lead. Every SEAL instinctively felt that her awareness of the environment surpassed their own trained senses. She anticipated obstacles before they appeared, navigated difficult terrain with ease, and positioned her team in optimal locations with a strategist's precision. Moments later, enemy operatives appeared, moving cautiously toward their target. The SEALs tensed, ready for combat. But she didn't hesitate. With barely a whisper, she directed the team into positions they hadn't considered, cutting off the enemy's likely paths and minimizing exposure. When the confrontation began, it was over almost before it started. Shots were precise, movements coordinated, and the operatives were captured with minimal risk. Not one of the SEALs was injured. Afterward, as the team regrouped, whispers spread through the ranks like wildfire. "She knew exactly where they would be," one soldier said, shaking his head. "It's like she was expecting them." Another added, "How is that possible?" No records, no past, and she predicted every move. Even the commanding officer, a man who had seen missions fail and succeed under impossible circumstances, could not hide his astonishment. He realized that this woman's presence wasn't just a coincidence. She had capabilities far beyond anyone's understanding, knowledge that defied explanation, and an almost instinctive grasp of tactics and strategy that made the SEALs feel both awe and unease. That night, back at the facility, the men couldn't sleep. Around small fires, they whispered about her, speculating, theorizing, and trying to rationalize what they had witnessed. Some wondered if she had been part of a top-secret government program, one erased from all records. Others considered more fantastical possibilities. But one truth became undeniable. This woman, without ID, without record, without past, had saved lives, averted disaster, and proven herself a force the SEALs had never encountered. And in their hearts, a new realization began to take root. She might not just be extraordinary, she might be indispensable. The shadows outside seemed to echo this sentiment. The operatives had been neutralized, but the sense lingered that something far larger was coming. And as the wind swept across the coastline, carrying the scent of salt and danger, every SEAL felt it deep within. She already knew. They just didn't yet know how. The days following the covert operation were quiet on the surface, but beneath that calm, tension buzzed through every corner of the training facility. Soldiers whispered in hushed tones about the woman who had no ID. No record, no past, and yet had led them flawlessly through a real-life threat. Some were still skeptical, others curious, but all were undeniably shaken. For the first time, many of the SEALs began to question their own abilities. They had trained for years, endured unimaginable hardship, and survived scenarios that had tested their limits, but none of that had prepared them for someone who seemed to operate on an entirely different level. The commanding officer, now more observant than ever, decided it was time to let the soldiers interact with her more directly. The woman did not request a formal briefing or permission. She simply walked among the men, assessing, observing, and subtly guiding them as they trained. At first, some SEALs bristled at her presence. One veteran, arms crossed, muttered under his breath, "She doesn't belong here. She has no clearance. Who does she think she is?" She didn't respond, and that in itself was a lesson. Instead, she demonstrated. She corrected a soldier's grip on his weapon without touching him, repositioned another during a tactical drill with nothing but a glance, and orchestrated a complex simulation in which every move was perfectly anticipated. By the end of the day, even the most skeptical SEALs couldn't deny her genius. What made her truly remarkable, however, was her ability to lead without demanding obedience. She never shouted, never forced compliance, and never sought credit. Instead, she earned it silently. Her guidance felt instinctive, as if she understood the strengths and weaknesses of each soldier better than they did themselves. Slowly, the men began to follow not out of fear, not because of rank, but because they trusted her judgment completely. The transformation was subtle but profound. The rookies, once hesitant and nervous, began to take initiative under her quiet mentorship. The veterans, who had long prided themselves on their experience, found themselves adjusting their tactics to match her insights. Even the commanding officer admitted internally that she had taught lessons in hours that years of traditional training had not. During a particularly grueling night exercise, the SEALs found themselves navigating a dense forest under simulated enemy fire. Visibility was low, danger felt imminent, and tempers were fraying. The woman moved among them like a shadow, silently coordinating, silently guiding. When one soldier faltered, she was there, her presence alone steadying him, her instructions precise and subtle. By the time the exercise ended, the SEALs were exhausted, drenched in sweat, and yet exhilarated. They had survived the night, not just because of their training, but because of her guidance. Around the campfire afterward, conversations were filled with awe and speculation. "She's different," one trainee whispered. "She knows things we don't. She sees things we can't even anticipate." Another veteran, shaking his head, added, "It's like she's lived 1,000 missions we haven't even imagined. And she's calm, unshakable. I don't get it." Yet despite their admiration, the mystery only deepened. She said nothing of her past, offered no explanations, and never revealed her motivations. The SEALs began to realize that part of her power lay in this silence. They were learning to rely on her, to trust her, even without understanding her. By the end of the week, a subtle shift had occurred within the team. Where there had once been skepticism and doubt, there was now respect and an almost instinctual loyalty. The SEALs had come to understand something fundamental. This woman, though unknown in history, records, or rank, had earned a place beside them in a way that no protocol could ever grant. And deep down, even the most experienced soldiers admitted a quiet truth they were not ready to voice aloud. They would follow her anywhere. Because she had proven, without question, that she was more than skill, more than training, more than record or rank. She was a leader in her own right, a shadowed force whose loyalty and wisdom demanded trust. And as she watched the men around her, silently, for the first time, some of them began to realize that perhaps her purpose here was not just to teach, but to transform them entirely. It started as a routine morning at the training. Facility soldiers running drills, the hum of machines, instructors barking orders, but the calm was deceptive. By mid-morning, a coded alert flashed across the facility's secure channels. A high-value target was under threat. Intelligence reports confirmed that a covert enemy cell had launched a surprise attack. And if not intercepted immediately, lives would be lost, and critical information could fall into the wrong hands. The SEALs had been trained for this scenario, but nothing could prepare them for what came next. The commanding officer quickly assembled his team, giving orders, assigning roles, and briefing the men on the situation. As always, all eyes turned to her. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. Her eyes, calm and focused, scanned the room like a predator sizing up the field. Every soldier instinctively knew if anyone could lead this mission, it was her. She did not ask for permission. She did not negotiate. She simply assumed command. The team deployed under her guidance, moving swiftly toward the target zone. She directed each man's positioning with precision, anticipating both terrain challenges and enemy strategies. Every decision was calculated, yet instinctive, an effortless combination of tactical genius and real-world experience. When the enemy appeared, it was chaos. Explosions echoed through the canyon, shadows darted between rocks, and gunfire cracked like thunder. But she remained calm. Her commands were minimal but precise. Move here, cover that, flank there. The SEALs, trained to react to their leaders, followed her without hesitation. One operative in the enemy cell attempted to ambush a rookie, but she intervened in a split second, neutralizing the threat with skill that seemed almost supernatural. Another soldier, pinned down by sniper fire, looked to her for guidance. With a subtle hand signal, she directed the team to create a diversion, allowing him to escape unharmed. Every move she made was flawless. Every prediction she had made in planning played out perfectly in execution. The SEALs found themselves relying on her instincts more than their own, and yet there was no arrogance in her demeanor, only a quiet, commanding authority. The enemy operatives were systematically contained and neutralized, but not without challenge. One soldier tripped over uneven terrain, nearly falling into a dangerous gap. Before anyone could react, she was there, steadying him without a word, and redirecting him into safety. Another operative attempted to take control of the target's sensitive materials, but she intercepted with uncanny timing, securing the assets and ensuring the mission's success. As the smoke cleared, the SEALs realized the magnitude of what had just happened. They had faced a real-world threat that could have cost lives, yet not a single member of the team was seriously harmed. All thanks to her. Back at the facility, debriefing began. Soldiers recounted the events, still in awe of her tactical brilliance. Some were frustrated at how reliant they had become on her, while others were humbled by her calm precision under fire. The commanding officer looked at her directly, his face a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "You've done something remarkable," he said. "Not just because of your skill, but because you led us where we couldn't see the path ourselves." She didn't reply. Instead, she quietly walked away, as if the mission had been merely routine. And yet the room buzzed with a new energy, respect, awe, and a growing realization that this woman unknown, unrecorded, without a past was beyond extraordinary. That night, around the campfire, the soldiers whispered among themselves. "She saved us," one veteran said. "And she didn't even need to. She could have watched us fail and walked away." Another added, "It's like she's always been ahead of everything. Every danger, every decision, she sees it before it even happens." The sense of unease remained too. None of them knew where she had come from, why she had appeared at their facility, or what her ultimate goal might be. And yet, all of them felt a deep, unspoken truth. They would follow her into any mission, any danger, any unknown, because she had proven herself without explanation. For the first time, the SEALs understood something profound. Skill, experience, and courage alone were not enough to define greatness. Sometimes greatness came quietly, unexpectedly, and commanded respect without ever demanding it. And in the shadows of that night, as the wind swept across the cliffs, carrying the echoes of gunfire and the scent of salt, one thought lingered in every mind: the woman was no ordinary warrior. She was a force beyond comprehension, and their lives had already been changed forever. The aftermath of the high-stakes mission lingered over the training facility like a heavy fog. Soldiers were exhausted, both physically and mentally, yet the adrenaline and awe of what had just occurred refused to fade. They had witnessed skill, and precision beyond anything they had ever trained for. They had survived a deadly threat, led by someone with no records, no identification, no past yet, whose presence had commanded instinctive respect and unwavering trust. In the debriefing room, the commanding officer paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back. His eyes, sharp and calculating, followed her as she stood silently near the window, observing without comment. It had become clear to him and to the entire team that she was more than just a skilled warrior. She was a phenomenon, a force of nature operating in the shadows of the known military world. "Tell us who you are," one of the younger SEALs finally blurted, frustration and curiosity mingling in his voice. "We need to know. We followed your lead, trusted your instincts, and you saved us. Who are you?" The woman remained silent. She didn't even turn to acknowledge the question. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her piercing eyes meeting the gaze of each soldier in the room. There was no arrogance, no malice, just an almost serene awareness that silenced everyone in an instant. Finally, the commanding officer stepped forward. "Enough games. You've proven your abilities beyond any doubt. But we need answers. Who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you here?" She let out a soft, almost imperceptible breath. Then she spoke, her voice calm, measured, carrying weight without raising volume. "I am not here to be known," she said. "I am here to teach, to prepare, to guide. My past is not important. What matters is what you do with the lessons I leave behind." The room fell into stunned silence. The SEALs exchanged glances, some with awe, some with disbelief. They had been trained to respect authority, to demand identification, to follow orders from known leaders, but here stood someone who had led them, protected them, and transformed them without ever revealing her identity. Her words were not dismissive, they were instructive. In that moment, the soldiers began to understand that she embodied everything they had been trained to aspire to: skill, discipline, courage, and a calm clarity under pressure. But she added something else, a profound understanding that greatness was not measured by rank, by record, or by recognition. It was measured by action, by impact, and by the courage to step into the unknown. The men left the debriefing room later that day forever changed. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing their experiences, debating theories, and speculating endlessly about her origin. Some suggested she was a ghost operative, a legend of covert programs erased from history. Others whispered that she might be something even more extraordinary, someone trained beyond the boundaries of human expectation. Even the commanding officer admitted, quietly to himself, that she had altered the very fabric of their understanding of leadership. He realized that her silence was as much a tool as her tactical genius. By withholding her past, she forced the SEALs to rely on their own instincts, to push beyond their limits, and to trust her without question. As the sun set over the rugged cliffs, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, she stood apart from the men once more. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and danger, and the SEALs could not help but watch her with reverence, curiosity, and a quiet fear. "She might not have a past," one veteran whispered, "but the future we realize will be shaped by her." And in that moment, everyone understood that some legends did not need a name. Some warriors left no trace, yet changed the lives of everyone they touched. She was such a warrior. She remained an enigma, untouchable, unrecorded, and unclaimed. And the SEALs, who had trained their whole lives to face the unknown, realized that they had just encountered someone beyond anything they had ever imagined. And yet, even as questions about her identity lingered, a quiet certainty took hold. Wherever danger arose, wherever precision and courage were required, she would be the unseen force shaping events, silently leading, silently guiding, and forever leaving a legacy without a trace. The days following the climactic mission passed quietly on the surface, but the air within the SEAL facility remained charged. Soldiers moved through routines with a new sense of awareness, tempered by the memory of a woman who had no ID, no record, and no past, and yet had transformed their understanding of skill, leadership, and courage. She had not spoken much in the aftermath, only offering subtle guidance during drills. But her presence was felt in every corner, in every strategy session, and in the way the men carried themselves. Some tried to follow her exactly, mimicking her movements, her instincts, her decisions. Others focused on the lessons she had silently imparted, realizing that her greatest teaching was not in her actions, but in how she had made them see their own potential. And then, as silently as she had arrived, she disappeared. There was no announcement, no farewell, no trace left behind. One moment she was there, observing and guiding, and the next, she was gone, vanishing like a shadow into the coastal night. The facility buzzed with speculation. Soldiers searched for explanations, scouring records, cross-referencing every program they had ever trained under. Nothing matched her profile. No record existed, no clearance, no history of any kind. Even the commanding officer, who had seen operations few could imagine, was left with a single, uncheckable truth: she had never been documented. And yet she had left a mark on every soldier she had touched. Around campfires, in hushed conversations, the men shared stories of her feats, how she had moved with unmatched precision, predicted enemy movements, and led them through situations they had only been trained to survive in theory. Every story carried the same astonishment and reverence. Some admitted that they had been scared of her at first, but now they realized they had been in the presence of someone who was extraordinary in every sense. Training protocols were quietly revised in the weeks following her departure. Lessons she had imparted without words were incorporated into simulations, exercises, and leadership drills. Yet no one ever claimed credit for her insights. Her methods became a silent legacy, a set of standards that had no origin, no author, and no explanation but worked flawlessly. Soldiers who had trained with her admitted privately that they would never forget her. Even years later, they would recall the sharpness of her gaze, the calm of her presence under fire, the quiet authority she had wielded without ever demanding it. Some called her a ghost, others a legend, but all agreed on one point: she had changed them. A veteran whispered during a later exercise, speaking to a young trainee, "We trained for years, thinking we knew everything. Then she came, and suddenly we realized how much we didn't. She showed us the standard we should strive for, even if we never fully understand it." The facility returned to normal routines, but a subtle tension remained. Soldiers moved with more caution, more precision, and more awareness. Every mission, every drill carried the imprint of her guidance. She had left no mark in files, no trace in history, no photograph to commemorate her presence. Yet the lessons she had imparted, the trust she had earned, and the lives she had saved were imprinted on the hearts and minds of every CL she had touched. And somewhere, beyond the reach of surveillance, beyond records and databases, she moved. Quietly in the world, a force unseen, a warrior unrecorded, guiding, teaching, and leaving ripples in places no one would ever know. The final thought lingered in the minds of the men who had witnessed her: greatness does not always require recognition. True power does not demand a past. And some of the most impactful leaders are the ones whose names are never known, whose stories exist only in the actions they inspire, and whose legacy lives on in the people they leave behind. She was that leader. And in the silence of the night, when the wind swept across the cliffs and the waves crashed endlessly against the rocks, the SEALs knew one truth: she had been here. She had taught them everything that could not be learned in manuals or drills. And though she was gone, her presence would echo in every mission, every strategy, and every heartbeat of those who had followed her forever. No ID, no record, no past. And yet the legend of the woman who commanded respect without explanation had been etched into history in the only way that truly mattered: through the lives she had changed.